Professional athletes oftentimes train on game days, but does that mean it's optimal or is it out of necessity? Today, we're going to explore just that, breaking down what the Bulls were doing in the 90s. Yes, what I'm Ramsey, legendary Hall of Fame strength and conditioning coach, was doing with the Bulls throughout the 90s. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman. I'm going to show you a bit of behind the scenes because he actually published that and shared it with us. So today, I'll share that with you. I'll also provide some context, what I did when I was in the NBA for 5 years, what I've been doing in college, and perhaps some ideas on what you can be doing, whether you're in professional sport or you're in private or college settings. So wherever you are, if you're interested in training athletes on game days, wondering whether or not that's for you or whether you should be doing that, or maybe there's a better way, then this is for you. Let's explore. Welcome to the first episode of the Performance Insider Podcast. And if you're here with us on YouTube, man, thank you so much for joining us, which would be best for the experience because I'm going to do a couple things, share the screen, show you a diagram that'll help kind of make this all make sense. So let's jump right into it. Over the past 5 years, game day lifting has seemed to increase in popularity. Now, part of that is just because of social media, right? Things just become viral. They take on a life of their own, and everybody begins to see them. And so over the past 5 years, you began to see, especially in the NBA, game day lifting becoming a little bit more popular. All right. And so today what we want to dive into is kind of two things. The first one, is this new or is this novel? The second one is this optimal? Okay. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name is Ramsey Nigem, and I spent 5 years in the NBA. From 2014 to 2019, I worked for the Sacramento Kings. I'm a California kid, so that was a dream job. And since then, I've moved on. I now work at the University of Kansas in a little bit of a different setting, right? College versus the pros, game congestion is a little bit different, and that will kind of provide the context. But hopefully, by knowing those two things, you should know I have some experience with this stuff. I'm also going to share what I'm Ramsey did in the 80s and 90s with Michael Jordan and the GOAT, obviously Michael Jordan, but obviously Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, the rest of them, right? And so his approach and what he used through 6 championships there in the 90s. So a couple really cool things. Now, the primary reason for game day lifting, as I take a look at the notes here, the primary reason is consolidation of stress, right? And so the way that you can think about this is, can we pack all of our stress within a certain period? Call that 24 hours, so on the same day, or maybe even more narrow than that, right? Maybe around a game window. So if a game is at 7 p.m., maybe all of our work can be done between 4 and 10 p.m., right? That 6-hour window, can we consolidate all of our work to these smaller windows and therefore use all of the remaining time or other time to recover? Right. So a nice way to think through this is if we play on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday, can we do all of our work on the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday and allow Tuesday and Thursday to be full recovery days? Right. Or maybe a different way to think about that is, can we consolidate all of the stress on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the hours of 4 to 10 p.m., allowing all other hours, right? So from 10 p.m. on Monday night all the way until 4 p.m. on Wednesday, all of that time to be full recovery time. That's the idea of consolidating stress. And there's benefits to this. By doing this, it creates this, what we would call undulation in training load. And if we don't do this, if we instead do something like game day, no lifting on game day, the Tuesday in this example becomes a training day, the Wednesday's a game day, the Thursday's a training day, and a Friday's a game day, then we might create more of a training monotony. And so to make this make a little bit more sense, let me just share the screen because I think that will provide a little bit of clear example. Again, if you're on YouTube with us, great, because this is going to become super easy to picture because I've already drawn it for you. If you're just listening to the pod, I'll explain it. Up top here, we have undulation. And what we see is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday high loading days for the game. Tuesday and Thursday are those recovery days, right? We might have a little bit of stress and maybe just life stress is there as well. But from a physiological and biomechanical perspective, these are our high days. We follow those with low days and we create this wave or undulation. Now, if you don't use this approach, especially in a highly congested schedule such as the NBA, NHL would work here as well for the same example, then what you might end up doing on accident or not or unknowingly is having a Monday, Wednesday high for the game days, but then your Tuesday and Thursday are your training days, and now we're imposing physiological and biomechanical stressors with higher loads. And as you can see, even if I just grab my red marker here, as you can see that the waving here is a lot less, right? And this creates this monotony versus that nice undulation that you get from up top. So this is why you might want to do a game day lifting approach where we're packing all of our stress on the same day and we're using those off days to recover. So there certainly is some benefits here. And at face value, this makes sense, right? If you look at that image, you say, wow, that makes sense. It's easy to create this undulation. And I would agree. In fact, I used a similar approach when I was in the NBA. We played on average every other day because you play 3.5 games per week, 3.5 over the 7. Every other day you're playing. And so we try to pack all of our stress on the game days, allowing for recovery on the off days, creating that nice undulation that we just showed. I now work in a setting where we don't play every other day. We only play 2 times during season and only 1 time typically, right? Maybe not 1 time, but 1 to 2 times in non-conference schedules. So generally speaking, you're going to play twice per week. There's only a few times per year where you have more than that, which is tournament time come March, in which case it's only a few weeks. So you can work through those kind of use cases. But I now work in the situation where we're only going to play twice per week. We're going to train maybe 3 to 4 other days on practice days, right? So this bottom kind of area, as we flip back, becomes something that I have to now consider a bit more, right? I don't use a game day approach anymore. And the primary reason is because I have ample amounts of training opportunities on non-game days. So I don't really have to force the game day approach because there is some limitations to this. The limitation to the game day approach is you have to handle logistics. Oftentimes the training doesn't become what I would call an adaptation type training where we're actually imposing high enough stress. If you're lifting after a game, the athlete's already fatigued. Those training sessions become more mobility, tendon, injury type stuff, but not stuff that's really muscular driven or elastic, I should say high effort or high load elastic driven, right? So now that I'm in a situation where we train more, I have to be more conscious of this, right? So that provides you just a little bit of context. Now, what I want to do is just show you what I'm Ramsey did in the 80s and 90s, because if you care about high athletic ability or a high performance sport or basketball, then the GOAT Michael Jordan is probably someone to look at. And what the Bulls were able to accomplish in the 90s is amazing. And so when we have this really cool study that Al actually just shared what he did, it's worth exploring. So let's jump right into that so you can see what Al was doing, and it answers the question of whether or not this is new. Right. And in fact, it certainly wasn't new. As we can see here, this is from 1989. Al Ramsey shared this with us. He answers the second question, which is this optimal? He kind of answers that here, right? What he says is game day strength training is necessary to maintain strength and conditioning levels during the season. This reality is based on the rigorous demands of the NBA schedule and the need to maintain conditioning throughout the season, right? So there's a necessity there for it. Right. But as we go down, let's just jump right into the program because we have this really cool 2-week in-season program that really is packed. I mean, within this figure, we have a ton of stuff packed in. You have the 2-week schedule up top. You have things labeled like game days, practice days, recovery days, lift days. You have things like an efficiency rating, which was calculated by taking the combined jump height time with the combined ground contact time and a rebound jump. I was using 3 different jump assessments, a squat jump, a counter movement jump, and a rebound jump. He was using that to direct the training on these game days. And down here, what you even see is not only the jumps that they were doing, the med ball work they were doing, but also a reactivity score, which is an RSI score. Right. So a ton is packed into here. And as we can see, I mean, Al is legend, Hall of Famer for a reason. But as we can see, high level stuff being done in the 80s and 90s. So this is not new. Now, what I want to do is jump right into this idea of, is this optimal, right? The first thing that you want to kind of appreciate is that if you're working in a highly congested schedule, optimal in season becomes maybe a more challenging to approach than if you're in a traditional setting, right? So the reason for lifting on game days in season is that idea of consolidating stress, allowing for frequent or more time for recovery, and you no longer have to worry about, are we consistent with our training? Because if we've decided that we're going to train on game days and the players bought into that, then you're going to get a ton of training opportunities, 82 training opportunities in the NBA. It's not without limitations, though, which is why I don't use it in college. There's some challenges. The first one, we now don't have as many opportunities to impose higher levels of load and intensity of effort, intensity of load. The stress that we're imposing on game days is likely minimal because if we're doing it before the game, we don't want to fatigue the athlete. And if we're doing it after the game, the athlete's already fatigued. I've already mentioned, oftentimes those post-game sessions become more tendon and isometric stuff rather than muscular-driven stuff. Still valuable, but a little bit different as far as goals and needs go for the athlete. So as we wrap this thing up, would I use this approach? Yes and no. In the NBA, I liked it. Now in a more traditional setting, in college where you only play once to twice per week, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of it, right? So if you're working in a setting where there's huge game congestion, consolidating stress becomes, I think, a worthy approach because now what we're doing is saying, hey, we're going to work on these days and these days become recovery days, or we're going to work within these hours and every other hour is focused on recovering. If you only if you only work or only compete 1 to 2 times per week, you're going to have 4 to 5 other days where you can now manage, program, periodize your training sessions, high days and low days, recovery days, all of that can get packed in as well as those game days. So I'm in a more traditional setting now. I don't use it, but it doesn't mean that it's not valuable or can't be used in a traditional setting, right? So wrapping it up, there is no right or wrong, right? Just pick the right one for your context. You always want to keep the athlete's goals and needs in mind. So if you're working in a highly congested schedule, but a player needs development in season and they're playing high minutes, that becomes a challenge, right? In which case the off season is probably better for you. Or if you're working in a highly congested schedule, an athlete has developmental needs and they're not playing, then I would say don't worry about those game days. Just train them, right? Train them hard, right? So keep in mind that individualization, that's always important. And if you train post-game, you just want to be conscious of the fact that most of your training is not going to impose the high biomechanical loading requirements to drive certain adaptations. And so you're going to want to find other opportunities for those. All right. So if stuff like this is your jam, as we wrap this up, then I just have a few things. The first one, hit the like, hit the subscribe button, because everybody says to do that on YouTube. So I might as well tell you to do that. It's supposed to help the channel. The second one, I write a weekly newsletter, actually twice weekly newsletter, where I review practical sports science research. It's called the Performance Insider Newsletter. It's absolutely free, and I'll drop the link in the description for you.